Miami lost some dudes from last year's defensive line, but with who they have coming back, who they have coming in, and who they'll have coaching them, that unit is going to be better in 2025.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We made it. I'm Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On this episode, we'll talk about an impressive list of recruiting visitors who were at the U watching practice this morning and where Miami stands. We'll talk about line of scrimmage standouts because that was a big focus in the media viewing this morning. And on that note, let's talk about Miami's defensive line. And that unit was all right last year, right? I'm not going to say they weren't. Like Bryant McKinney, former great offensive lineman at Miami, was on with us earlier this week, and he mentioned, like, really on the defense, the D-line was not the issue. It was more of the defensive secondary. I'll still say, and I think I speak for most of us, where we expected a little bit more consistent disruption from the D-line last year and higher sack numbers than we got, but I have many reasons to believe we're going to get those higher sack numbers this year. And again, Miami wasn't bad in that category last year. The Hurricanes tied for 18th nationally, which is okay in sacks, with 36 a year ago. Now, compare that to the nation's top three. So Miami had 36 sacks. Ole Miss, Boise State, and Ohio State all had over 50, 52, and 53. So we want Miami, and we expect Miami to get near 50 sacks, if not over that this season. Now, as for who the Hurricanes lost from last year's defensive line, you had, three players who were tied for the team lead in sacks with 5.5 apiece, which, again, I thought we would have someone near double digits. 2 out of those 3 sack leaders are gone, off to the NFL. Miami loses Tyler Barron, who produced 5.5 sacks last year. I wish him all the best. It was weird, though, with Barron, because out of his 5.5 sacks last year, 4.5 of those were in the first 3 games of the season. So it was kind of a feast or famine thing with him. Someone who did pick up some of that slack later in the year was Simeon Barrow, who I thought had a really good season at defensive tackle. He had 5.5 sacks last year. And Miami also loses 2.5 sacks from Elijah Alston last year. But in terms of what Miami's bringing back, and folks, this is the first part of the reason why I think Miami's going to have a renaissance and a lot more disruption at the line of scrimmage this year on the defensive side. Obviously, on the offensive side, I don't expect very many sacks allowed. We'll talk about that. But Miami does bring Akheem Mesidor back. Now, Akheem Mesidor was the third of that trio who tied for the team lead with 5.5 sacks. But I have every reason to strongly believe that Mesidor is going to bring that number significantly up this year. So Akheem Mesidor last season was playing, for him, out of position for most of the year. They needed him to play in the interior, defensive end, the edge. That's the best spot for him. And the promise has been that's where Mesidor is going to play full-time this year, on the edge. Also, last year, Mesidor didn't have the benefit of a fully healthy off-season, spring football, and fall camp because he was dealing with the foot issue and waiting on the custom cleats. This year, he does have the benefit of a fully healthy off-season. And Akheem Mesidor didn't have to come back. There was some doubt that he would come back. He could have tried to go to the NFL this year, but I think for Mesidor coming back for his senior year, fully healthy off-season, playing in position we expect this year, I think Mesidor is a guy who's going to get near, if not at, double-digit sacks this year. I'm very bullish on Akheem Mesidor. The same way, folks, I'm really bullish on Rueben Bain having really a renaissance year. Last year was a tough one for Rueben, and, some people can simplify it to say, well, he regressed last year. there was a lot of stuff that was out of Rueben Bain's control. Now, he had 3.5 sacks last season. He had 7.5 as a true freshman the year prior. But last year, Bain still manages to produce 3.5 sacks despite missing almost half of the regular season. Bain missed 5 games last year. And for most of those others, because the injury that he picked up was in the opening game against Florida. And you know what? I count that Florida game as a game played. He missed most of that game where he got injured. So he basically missed half of the season last year. And in the games that he did play in, was not fully healthy for many of those. So I think Bain is going to bounce back because he's in a much better place physically and, of course, mentally. He's got the extra maturity that comes for another year. So I think, to me, and we've had this debate before in recent episodes, who's going to lead the team in sacks this year? I think it's going to be a healthy competition throughout the season between Akheem Mesidor and Rueben Bain. I think they're going to be kind of going back and forth with the sack lead throughout the season. I expect both of them to bounce back big time. Miami also brings back Malik Bryant, who I think is going to have a bigger role this year. Was a backup last season. He'll be so again probably this year, but I think is going to get more snaps. He had 2.5 sacks last year in a limited role. And some of the guys Miami has coming in, I'll go back to some of the returning guys here in a second, but Hayden Lowe, I know Hayden is a true freshman, but I think Lowe can have the type of impact as a true freshman that Bain did 2 years ago, because physically, this dude is all the way there. And he's a 5-star recruit at defensive end, 250 plus pounds already. I think Hayden Lowe is someone who is going to be a spark plug for Miami year one at the U. You know, Miami at defensive tackle has David Blay coming in from Louisiana Tech. And this is someone I think that they hope can have the sort of impact, if not even a bigger impact, than Simeon Barrow had last year, who, you know, produced 5.5 sacks from the interior. That's what David Blay does best at defensive tackle. He had at Louisiana Tech, so the competition level was not up to what he's going to face this year, of course, but 6.5 sacks last year. And David Blay has been looking good and looking smooth so far in practice. And then another guy coming back that I'm really high on, who's been practicing super well this week, is Armando Blunt. Now, I know he's heading into his second year, but the young man who got to Miami so early, he just turned 18. I think he just turned, I think he just turned 18, Armando Blunt. And he's someone who looks different, like in practice. Like Armando Blunt is someone who is, you know, coming out of high school, again, a 4-star, borderline 5-star recruit. He actually was a 5-star at a time before he reclassified. I think Armando Blunt is someone who's going to burst on the scene and have a big impact. Another one to watch out for in the interior, Artavius Jones. I think he's improving. He's making the transition from like a weight room juggernaut, which is kind of what Mario Cristobal said, to more of a complete football player. And I'm not forgetting about Josh Horton. That was someone, when we talked after practice on Wednesday with Peter Ariz from CanesInsight.com, Pete pointed out how good Josh Horton has been looking, and that dude has got that size. I know our friend, the Truth Teller, always loves when these defensive linemen are 300 plus. Josh Horton is one of the biggest guys on that defensive line right now, heading into year 3. I think this is a year when Horton can make even more noise. Now, line of scrimmage and seeing the defensive line do drills, as we get the practice reports coming in from this morning, that was a big emphasis and something the media got to watch today. We get this quote from Gabby Urrutia. During bag drills, Armando Blunt just looked different than the others with his blend of athleticism and strength. Rueben Hurricane Bain had a good practice today. Hayden Lowe, these guys were looking powerful in those bag drills. Artavius Jones and Justin Scott. Justin Scott is a guy who could probably have an impact. This is his second year, but someone who could probably have an impact with another full season of playing time. Ahmad Moten is someone who made some disruptive plays. And, you know, a couple of guys, again, we're talking about some of the offensive players who have been standing out. This was a good practice today for Josh Moore, who's another one. We talk about someone, he's a wide receiver coming in with the sort of size where they can make an impact the first year. You know, Josh Moore is already the biggest receiver in Miami's room right now. And Malachi Toney, who's someone who I think is going to provide some competition for Ray Joseph, who's also practicing well, by the way. And Dalen Upshaw is another one coming in who's been practicing well, that these guys can provide competition in the slot. And, you know, guys like Malachi Toney and Dalen Upshaw might be able to see the field so far in year one. So I want to talk a little bit more when we come back about some observations on special teams drills, which fans are always curious about, and on a really stacked list of recruiting visitors today. So this is one of those. I mean, unofficial visits in spring football is a tremendous showcase to show these young high school players what your program is all about. We'll talk about who was here by surprise, and where Miami stands. You want to keep it locked. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Oh, my friends, we are only getting started with FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on all of it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack and I host that show. We've been talking a lot about the settlement with the lawsuits. Of course, March Madness coming up. You can check out all of that Locked On ACC. Like this show, it's available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. So something that was observed on Friday in practice was some punt returning drills, which I hadn't gotten to see earlier on in the week, but some players that were apparently returning punts today. Nathaniel Ray Joseph, who has experience doing that at Miami. True freshmen Malachi Toney and Dalen Upshaw, who, of course, when Miami was recruiting these players, that was one of those attributes that we talked about for both of them, potential as kick and punt returners, because now that's an area when you talk about a lack of effectiveness and explosion in recent years, man, if Miami could have a more consistent return game, especially with kickoff returns, because like punt returns are tougher these days because with all these Aussie punters, they do such a great job, forcing fair catches and stuff. But kickoff returns is an area where hopefully Miami can gain some traction. And another true freshman who was seen on punt returns today was Gerard Pringle, the true freshman running back, another guy who's got some shiftiness and explosion. So I'm sure we'll see more of that throughout spring football. We'll kind of get an idea of, once they narrow it down, who are the primary one or two who seem to be getting most of those punt return and kick return reps. As far as recruiting goes, Miami has already had some high-profile visitors earlier this week, right? Miami has hosted Javian Mallory, the 4-star running back who we really love here, and we hope he ends up being a Cane. Miami hosted the top receiver in the class, Tristan Keys, earlier this week. Miami hosted offensive lineman 4-star Ben Congdon, who ended up committing to Miami on Monday, the day of his unofficial visit. And Friday has been, I'd say, the most impressive pound-for-pound visitors list that Miami has had. I'm definitely leaving a few names out here, but among the visitors that Miami had at the indoor practice facility in Green Tree today, Jalen Seatbelt Waters, who was kind of, I guess, a late confirmation, the 4-star defensive back, the former Florida Gators commit, who decommitted from Florida. Most of the momentum and the smoke has been for Waters to Miami. He's still going through his process, but we all know with Jalen Waters, not only did Jalen have a strong connection with the Hurricanes already, because Miami was heavily recruiting him, and even going back several weeks, there were rumors about a possible flip to Miami. But Waters has a very strong relationship with new Miami safeties coach Will Harris. Harris was his primary recruiter at Florida. Now Harris is at Miami, so you do the math. The math is mathing in our direction that the Hurricanes are a strong front runner for Jalen Waters, who is one of the top defensive backs in the class of 2026. If Miami can pull this off, and again, signs are pointing to Miami, but he's not committed, at least not yet. If Miami could pull this one off, this would be a huge get. Derek Cooper visiting today out of Chaminade, one of the top running backs in the class of 2026. And as we talked about Cooper earlier this week with Brian Smith, our recruiting overlord, Derek Cooper is someone who could potentially play both ways. I mean, at least a little bit, because he's an elite running back and an elite safety at the high school level. Cooper, we'll talk a little bit more about him because we got a recruiting question that we're going to answer later. But, Cooper grew up a Miami fan. They posted a photo of himself at like 5-6 years old throwing up the U. So, Miami has competition to land Cooper, but getting that visit today was big. His Chaminade teammate, Jason Lopez, wide receiver, was also on campus. Like Jason Lopez, he reminds folks a lot of Xavier Restrepo. But as my guy Marcus Benjamin from CanesCounty.com says, Lopez has probably an even higher upside than Restrepo did, which would be really exciting. And Lopez is a Miami fan, so hopefully Miami can pull this one off. But if he's even got a higher upside than Restrepo, the possibilities are endless if we can get him here. We have the Jones High School duo visiting today. Dereon Coleman, if I say his name correctly, who's committed to Miami, the quarterback from class of 2026, who, by the way, has been shining. He won quarterback MVP at Under Armour Miami this past weekend. Coleman is visiting today, and he's been committed to Miami and fully locked in for quite some time. And Dereon Coleman is being an ambassador for others. So he has his Jones High School teammate, his wide receiver, Larry Miles, who's a 4-star guy, visiting today as well. Miami seems to be a leader, one of the leaders in the clubhouse for Larry Miles, and obviously his quarterback, wants to bring him with him to South Florida. So that's big. Another top player visiting Miami today is Justice Fitzpatrick, 4-star defensive back from St. Thomas Aquinas, visiting. And there are a few others that I could get to, but those to me are the headliners of the recruiting visitors list for Miami today. So you got some really good ones, and hopefully they got a good look at how practice is running and good impressions from the coaches and Miami players that they talk to. Because, and by the way, for the Jones High School guys, they get to catch up with their buddy Malik Bryant on Miami, who played at Jones High School, the defensive end. So hopefully that all goes well. I want to get to some questions from you guys. We got the Locked On Canes insiders sending me questions. By the way, if you want to become the Locked On Canes insider, click the link in the show description below. You can unlock exclusive access. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours and vice versa with breaking news, show updates, recruiting scoops, one-on-one questions and answers. Click the link below. Try it free for 14 days. And then if you like it, after 2 weeks, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked On Canes insider staff. Get a question about Miami's trajectory from Canes Comeback Tour, who says, I wonder, Donno, the overall feeling. What is the overall feeling truly about Mario Cristobal and staff? He says, I believe and I am happy with the trajectory. Okay, well, I've noticed like a lot of a mood shift, like right after the season was over. Miami lost 3 out of 4 games. You knew you were about to lose Cam Ward, had no idea who was going to replace Ward. There was some negativity that a lot of us had like creeping in there for a little while, but another really strong offseason for Miami, which means stacking talent and stacking coaching and finding your next quarterback. And I think the mood really shifted in a positive way. First of all, the staff changes, they feel right to me. Damian Lewis now coaching the defensive tackles, Will Harris coaching the safeties, Zach Etheridge coaching the corners. All of those moves on paper, of course, appear to be upgrades over the position coaches that they replaced. Corey Heatherman at defensive coordinator, who, and I know, like, I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel really good about Lance Guidry heading into last year, but I thought he was part of the failure of Miami's defense, whereas you get Corey Heatherman, who had a top 5 defense nationally at Minnesota last year, and the defensive players seem really high on Heatherman's scheme, with more emphasis on simplicity and aggression and with a more direct approach. when we spoke to Akheem Mesidor earlier this week, he was glowing about how much he likes Heatherman's defense and how much more simple it is. You know your assignment, you go out there and crack some skulls and do it. And another one of those reasons why I think the defensive line is going to benefit and bounce back and be even more disruptive this year is because of the scheme and the approach that Corey Heatherman is employing. So, and obviously bringing in Carson Beck is big. I know he's not fully cleared. He's not throwing yet, but he's out there working with his teammates. And once he is cleared to throw, which could happen even in as soon as a couple of weeks from now, that's going to be important chemistry building with, one of the most high profile and most experienced quarterbacks in the country. I mean, Carson Beck a year ago was considered a Heisman front runner heading into the 2024 season. He's got a 24-3 record at Georgia. Like, this guy is good. And overall, talk about trajectory. There's no question. Mario Cristobal has, over the past 3 years, he has upgraded Miami's roster. There's no question about that. People sometimes question his game day coaching and decisions, but there's no question he's upgraded the roster. And it's evident that the talent floor has been raised. No doubt. The floor has been raised. I think the question this year that's going to separate, is Miami going to have like a good year or a really good year, will be how high is the ceiling. The floor has been raised. How high is the ceiling? It's going to be the question heading into next year. We get this question from Nick in the 561 who says, hey, looking ahead to the 2025 season and reflecting back on spring 2024, he asks, could linebacker become the position group causing concern, similar to how everyone expected the defensive backs to struggle last year? Honestly, I don't feel that way about it, Nick. I feel significantly better about linebacker right now than I did about defensive back last year. There's no question. We all knew last year defensive back looked like a concern heading into 2024. I don't view linebacker that way this year, and I'll tell you why. First of all, Miami's defensive coordinator, Heatherman, is also the linebackers coach, which I think is an advantage for that unit. Wesley Bissainthe has had a solid career so far. He's looking good in practice, taking on more of a leadership role. Popo Aguirre is ready to take a huge step forward this year. Bobby Pruitt, I think another one. This guy is a live wire in practice, and you've got players like Jalen Alderman back for quality experience depth. Chase Smith, who I probably don't talk about enough, not to be forgotten. He looks really good in practice and is another elder statesman. I think he's a fifth-year senior this year who's made some good plays. And I like what I see so far from true freshman Kellen Wiley, and there's others out there like a Darius Hayes. I'm probably forgetting to mention some more, but you guys tell me if I'm wrong. You can leave me a comment or send me an X post at Locked On Canes. Do you have concerns about linebacker the way that we did about defensive back last year? Because I don't feel that way. I think Miami's linebacker unit is going to be pretty strong. I mean, the notable loss from last year is Kiko. Kiko actually had a down year last year. You obviously got to replace, his leadership, and we wish that he'd had, the similar impact last year to what he had in 2023. But I feel pretty good about linebacker. We're going to answer more of you guys' questions on the other side, including, I got a question from one of you that if I answer it, I'm going to make some of you very angry. I will answer it next here on Locked On Canes. Oh, my friends, we're all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team, plus the gear, wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure for another listen today, you check out Locked On College Basketball. You want to get your cheat sheets ready for your tournament brackets coming up. And Andy Patton and Isaac Shade from Locked On College Basketball will make you experts. And of course, I'm sure they have been covering Jay Lucas's arrival at Miami. We actually, in case you guys missed it, it was a late night primetime drop yesterday. I connected last night with JJ Jackson, who hosts Locked On Blue Devils, to get the Duke perspective and a really good one on Miami's new head basketball coach, because Miami, of course, they poached Jay Lucas from the coaching staff of John Shire at Duke to make him their new head coach. So we got an awesome breakdown. He even threw in some basketball recruiting nuggets for us. So check out that episode that we did with JJ Jackson. All right, so where's the one here that's going to get me in trouble? All right, here it is. Pat Mack. Pat Mack is trying to throw me under the bus. So he said, and I've got to answer it because Pat Mack, this guy has been an everydayer since day one, so I can't not answer his question. But he says, I was wondering, he says, about the quarterback situation at Ohio State. Do they have a stud or are they looking? If there is nobody standing out, he says, do we have a shot at Jeremiah Smith? Now, here's why. You're going to get me in trouble, Pat, because I can already tell you my comment section, RIP, the comment section on today's Locked On Canes, because anytime I bring up the name Jeremiah Smith, I get a bunch of comments like, give it up. Stop being delusional. It's over. He's never coming here. And then I also get Ohio State fans who were like, hands off, dummy. So this is a no-win for me. But since Pat Mack has been an everydayer, for the duration of this program. All right, so here's the quarterback situation at Ohio State. They don't have proven experience, but they've got young studs competing for the starting job. The front runner is former Alabama 5-star transfer Julian Sayin. He's probably the leader in the clubhouse to be the starter. Again, former 5-star recruit. They've got Lincoln Kienholz and incoming 5-star freshman Tavian St. Clair. Those guys are, and Ryan Day, their head coach, described it as an open competition. Most of us expect Julian Sayin to be the guy who ends up being the starting quarterback. In terms of Miami's probably not getting Jeremiah Smith. I'm sorry. I believe the nail in our coffin was Ohio State promoting Brian Hartline, who, of course, JJ has the amazing relationship with. That was his primary recruiter. We can put that to bed. I'm sure whoever wins Ohio State's starting quarterback job is going to be pretty good, and they're going to find a way to keep JJ happy because he is their bell cow right now. So, listen, I know that there have been rumors, and I do buy into some of this, that when it comes down to April transfer portal, I think Miami is going to look into and probably have success landing a pretty high-profile receiver from somewhere, now that we have Carson Beck and it's easier to recruit more receivers. So I think Miami's going to land somebody good. I just don't think it's going to be that somebody that you asked me about. We get a question. We are gaining traction as far as visits go from top recruits. Who are 3 players that we have a realistic chance of landing that would almost assure Miami a top 5 2026 recruiting class? All right, so I'm going to look at 3 players that Miami is in the mix for, very much in the mix for. And if you land these 3 players, we're probably talking about a top 5 class come, whenever they finalize that, I guess next December after the letters of intent are signed. So obviously the easiest path to a top 5 class would be if Miami can seal the deal with Jackson Cantwell, top offensive lineman and top overall player in the class of 2026. I'm not saying Miami's leading for him, but I'm saying Miami has a realistic shot. Miami is in the mix. Cantwell loves the fact that Miami has an offensive line-driven program and a proven track record in developing O-line talent. So I think Mizzou is going to be the toughest team to beat for him because they don't want to let him leave the state. But I think Miami is very much in the mix for Jackson Cantwell. And, of course, if you land him, that's that you're hitting the easy button for a top 5 class if you can land that dude. A couple of other players, some local players. I talked about Derek Cooper. Miami can land Cooper. He's a top 35 national recruit. one of the top athletes, one of the top running backs in the class. We believe Georgia probably has a slight lead for him, with Miami riding in a close second. And then another one, Calvin Russell, local player, number 4 receiver in the class, a top 50 overall player. Seems to be a Miami versus Syracuse battle right now for Calvin Russell. But if the Hurricanes can get that one over the finish line along with those other two, yeah, we'll be talking about a top 5, if not a top 2 or 3 class, when it's all said and done. So that would be the easiest path here. We get this one from Ponce, who says, I'd like to know more about you. How has covering the team in this setting allowed you to express your fandom in your takes? How would you compare traditional media outlets to Locked On Canes, and what do you prefer? I prefer this, honestly. If you're talking about like being able to do what I do on Locked On Canes compared to like writing for an established newspaper, and they've kind of been doing it that certain way for over a century, where if you write for a newspaper, the whole mission statement is you keep your fandom out of it. You're either not a fan of the team you cover, or you pretend you're not a fan of the team you cover. Whereas at Locked On, I have the opportunity and the freedom to give you guys a whole lot of information, sure, but doing it from my honest perspective of being a lifelong Miami Hurricanes fan and an alumnus of that school. That when Miami wins a big game, I give you guys my unfiltered, unbridled enthusiasm. Miami loses a tough game, I can, give you my perspective on how much it sucked, what just happened, right? I don't have to pretend to be objective and whatever. And also, I'll say about the Locked On Network is incredible. The amount of feedback and resources and tips that we get on really how to structure a show and how to maximize our content. This is an unbelievable platform, and I'm being fully honest here when I say doing this show is the most fun that I've had in my career. And I'm 40. I'm getting a little long in the tooth now. I've been doing this since I was like, let's say 20 years old. So we got 2 decades in the books now of doing this as somewhat professionally. This is the most fun that I've had, and I wouldn't trade this gig for anything, man. I appreciate you guys for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Hit that thumbs up button, hit the like and subscribe. And yeah, we'll have actually another episode later on today. It's been too long. I want to reconnect with the postcast king, Jim Greashopper, and get his take on the offseason, right? We talked earlier about how, Miami's trajectory and the assistant coach hires and Carson Beck. I want to catch up with our guy Grease on all that stuff. So we'll talk to you guys later on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.